It is, okay then.
I got out, I managed to get out.
Right then. It's okay, is everybody out of the building?
No, there's still my partner in.
Right, is he able to get out of the building?
No, because there's fires near the door.
When the call came in, it seemed an unlikely town and an unlikely venue for this sort of thing to happen. At a joinery shop, after tea, when you wouldn't expect people to be working, things just didn't seem quite right.
Everybody was really quite worried. You know, it could have been the person that you walked past in the street, it could have been anybody.
I don't know how anybody could live with it, knowing that they burnt somebody alive.
Everybody was so shocked and everybody was locking up more and feeling a bit worried about it all because nothing like this had ever happened in the village.
A few miles from the bustling seaside resort of Skegness sits the small, picturesque market town of Burgh-le-Marche, affectionately known by its residents as the Village.
Everybody here calls it a village because we feel like village people. We're so connected and so we help one another.
Burgh-le-Marche is a typical Lincolnshire village on the edge of the Lincolnshire Wolds, famous for its windmill, where people are hard-working and just get on with their lives.
I've had a salon in Burgh-le-Marche for 14, 15 years, and it's a lovely, quiet village where everybody knows everybody. Everybody gets on with everybody, and my clients are lovely.
But the peaceful tranquility of the village is about to go up in flames.
We've just gone up to the workshop to pick some things out.
Yeah.
And somebody came up with us behind.
Yeah.
And they attacked us and set fire to the place.
The workshop on fire belongs to well-known local couple David Twigg and Julie Dixon, who own a joinery business next to their home. As the emergency call comes in, Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Station Commander Gary Milson is immediately dispatched to the scene.
Once I received the call, I'd be straight into my car and making headway down to Burgh-le-Marche. It's only a few miles down the road. There's not a lot of time to mull over things and get other information in. The information that was relayed to me at that point was that two men dressed in black and wearing balaclavas had accosted David Twigg and his partner. They'd locked David into the storeroom and then proceeded to pour petrol into the foyer of the building and lit it before fleeing the scene. As I approached the premise, there was a white picket fence surrounding it. It seemed quite surreal, the appliances at the bottom with the lights on. As I walked past that towards the entrance where the activity was taking place, the incident commander gave me a quick brief and said that there was very little fire and the fire was out, and they was now trying to locate David Twigg, who they'd been informed was locked in a room inside the building.
With the blaze having been brought under control and extinguished, Gary and his team desperately try to locate David Twigg.
The workshops were an old railway buildings. They were long and thin, and at the end there was a small area with a kitchen, a storeroom and a toilet and a small foyer that linked these all together. And they were all involved in the fire. They was all black and heated and sooty, but they were all empty apart from the storeroom door that was locked. There was no keys present. The decision was made that the wall might be easier to break through than the door, and a hole was made in the wall, and we could see that there was somebody who appeared to be on the knees facing the door. We tried to rouse them through shouting and speaking to them, but there was no response.
With David not responding, the urgency to reach him grows and the fire crew break deeper into the wall, releasing the door.
As the door opened, David Twigg fell forward into our arms and forward onto the floor. The crews immediately turned him over and began resuscitation. We had an ambulance already in attendance and the paramedics were very quickly there, and we assisted the paramedics in placing him into the ambulance where they could work on him further.
In the back of the ambulance, paramedics battle to resuscitate David Twigg.
The time frame from the call to us getting David out of the cupboard may have been around about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we worked on him for probably another 15-20 minutes after that, before the paramedics decided to call time and pronounce him dead.
With David dead, the situation immediately changes, and a murder investigation is launched.
The first information I got was that there'd been a fire at a business premises near Skegness in Lincolnshire, of course, and that 2 men had been involved. They'd made off, where they hadn't been found at the moment. A man had tragically died, believed to be the owner of the business, and his partner, who worked with him, a lady, had been quite badly injured in the incident. She was being taken to hospital to be treated, and officers were at the scene. So lots of things going through your mind, but at no stage anything other than, you know, this is a murder case. It's tragic. David Twigg has died, and we need to find these 2 people as soon as possible.
With fire crews, police and paramedics at the scene, it isn't long before news of the tragedy spreads around the town.
It was a big event for Lincolnshire. A robbery homicide in a small village like Borough-le-Marsh is something that had never happened before in my 25 years covering the area, and it may well never happen again.
Rumours I heard was they was looking for 2 men, and my house faces a back field, and of course the drones was going over there. There was quite some noise, and I couldn't believe it actually.
The whole village were stunned that something could have happened on the doorsteps.
It was big news, and everybody was really quite worried that whoever did it could have been out there and they could have been next. You just don't know.
There was a lot of anxiety in the community. Borough-le-Marsh is a long way from the nearest police station, a long way sometimes from the nearest police officer. And local people were obviously very concerned that they may be the victim of a similar burglary.
In the Lincolnshire town of Borough-le-Marsh, police have launched a murder investigation after local joiner David Twigg was pronounced dead following a fire at his workshop. His partner, Julie Dixon, had managed to escape and call 999, reporting that masked intruders had broken in, locked David in the storeroom, and set the place on fire.
The impact on the local community after this happened was immense. It's the only way I can describe it. I was clearly getting phone calls. The local community officers were being stopped in the street. People were going to the police station. There was a kind of sense of not just why has this happened, but who's responsible, and just as importantly, is it going to happen again? Is somebody else going to be, you know, the target of these 2 individuals? And nobody could think of a reason why David and Julie would be targeted.
David Twigg was an only son. He grew up in the area. His parents remained in the area. He was a master joiner, very popular and a hard-working man in the local area. He was also a very big man, well over 6 feet tall and 19 stone, but he was a presence in the community.
David met Julie in 1996 when she was going through a divorce. The pair quickly moved in together.
They remained together for 15 years. They came across as a typical middle-aged couple. In Borough-le-Marsh, David and Julie were seen as a team. David was the carpenter, the joiner at the business, and Julie was doing the finance and the accounts for the business.
Outside of joinery, David soon discovered a new hobby, stock car racing, which opened up a whole new social circle for him and Julie, with professional racer John Mickle and his wife Lisa.
So from that very first race meeting, really kind of just kicked it off. We enjoyed each other's company. They wanted to come to every single race meeting. They wanted to be involved.
And David soon found a way to combine work with his newfound love when he set up a sideline alongside his joinery company.
As David's business grew, he was quite happy to sponsor the motor racing team. That was one of his passions, and so they undertook that deal, which was several £1,000s.
Julie and David were keen to promote this new kitchen bits and bobs business, which is an online business that they were trying to get off the ground. I think they felt that probably some branding on the race cars, and then obviously we can promote it through social media as well.
The sponsorship proved very successful. David particularly got on very well with the racing team, and they were invited over to America to watch the team racing, and all seemed well. It was a very happy relationship, and he got on very well with them.
I think from the beam on his face when we first, agreed at Liddon Hill, he just seemed incredibly proud. He seemed very smiley. You could tell he was passionate about his business, and this was something that he felt was going to enhance the people that would see his work.
The friendship between the two couples started to grow stronger.
I think from the very first time we met them, I really, really liked what they brought to the team, and, the energy, and we call it a race family, and it just felt like they were going to become part of our race family. Julie wanted to be hands-on with me in the kitchen, while David was very quick to throw himself into the deep end with John on the mechanic side as well. They just got stuck in. It wasn't just about the racing anymore. They started to get quite involved. She wanted to be involved in the family life that we had as well. She would buy presents for my children, who were aged 4 and 7 then. They looked fondly upon her and David as well. So they became family friends.
And it was Lisa Julie turned to in the aftermath of the tragedy of David's death.
The very first time I heard about David was on Monday morning. I had a phone call somewhere between 7 and 7:30 in the morning from Julie. She basically was hysterical. She was shouting down the phone, "He's dead, he's dead." And I really didn't have a clue what she was even talking about. I didn't know who's dead. I said, "Julie, who's dead?" She said, David's dead. And I then tried to get some more information. What's happened? She said, a fire. So none of her sentences were very long. It was just words being thrown out at me. I said, a fire? What, there's a house fire? She said, no, workshop, fire, masked men, attacked. From that phone call, I immediately knew I had to go and visit her straight away. I knew it would be a long journey up to Lincolnshire, probably 4 hours. I just grabbed my purse, my keys, and left. So the 4 hours going there was, it's a very weird and surreal situation. You keep thinking, has this really happened? Is this some kind of, is this true? Is it real? I just can't get my head around it. It's an awful lot of information, hearing her so upset on the phone. And those words, he's dead, they just kept playing and playing in my head.
When Lisa arrives at Julie's parents' house, she finds Julie in a state of shock.
Julie was sitting and rocking in a chair. I was absolutely taken back when I first saw her because she had burns on her face. She told me that her and David, on the Sunday, had gone down to the yard, which is just a short stroll from the house, to lock up. That's all they were doing. They were going to lock up. She said that she had asked David to go into the storeroom to get a light bulb. And these two men wearing balaclavas, dressed in black and hoodies, had come into the barn, had locked David in the cupboard, and then had grabbed her. And that they had tried and forced her towards this circular saw. I asked her how she got away, and she said, I just squirmed out of, she said, lucky I was wearing a hoodie. I squirmed out of it and ran. She said she ran out of the door, she ran across the field, and Then I think after a short space of time, she turned round to look back to see that these intruders were also leaving the premises and that they'd shut the door behind them. She was then concerned about David, so she went back to the barn. And when she opened the door, suddenly the combustion, the flames, that's what had caused the burns to her face.
While Lisa consoles her heartbroken friend, police turn up to interview Julie as a key witness to the crime.
She was only able to give some basic details. We didn't want to push too hard, of course. She's a victim, she's lost David in the most awful circumstances. Clearly the 999 call provided us with a little bit of information, which was helpful, but we wanted to try and dig deeper if we could, so we had to ask those difficult questions as early as possible. She was interviewed by specially trained officers, but sometimes it just wasn't possible to continue with interviews because Julie wasn't in a emotionally fit state to carry on at that point. So we had to do lots of short sections rather than a really long and draining and demanding interview.
With little information gleaned from Julie and unease growing among the locals, police turned to the public for help.
In the hours that followed, Lincolnshire Police made appeals for the intruders and did reveal that a 999 call had been made by Julie Dixon and gave the description of these two masked men who had been to the workshop, and that Julie had managed to push one of them away and escape, and then rang the fire brigade on 999.
I remember holding more than one press conference, which wasn't just local and regional, it was national as well, because this was big news in terms of what had happened and where it had happened and the type of community that it was affecting.
As Lincolnshire Police continued to make these appeals, we would take that information and circulate it amongst the various radio stations, local newspapers, daily newspapers in Lincolnshire. And the police were obviously very anxious to get that message out as wide as possible.
With Lincolnshire Police desperately trying to piece together the events of the night and establish the identity of the masked men, Fire Commander Gary Milson scours the crime scene for clues.
Once the fire's been extinguished, we then start on the scene preservation side of it. And as we withdraw from the building, we're trying to make sure that anything that has been removed out of the building is logged or is placed back into the building with care, so that should we need to, we can rebuild that picture, that jigsaw puzzle, to help us find out how the fire started.
I've dealt with quite a few fires, and unfortunately fatal fires as well, and murder cases, and it's probably one of the most challenging cases that you have to deal with, because by its very nature, fire destroys, and fire destroys evidence, not just the fire itself, but the water that's used.
Having established petrol was used as the accelerant, Senior Investigating Officer Stuart Gibbon begins trying to make sense of the scene.
All police officers and detectives are constantly reminded about how important the golden hour is. It's a time where you can lose evidence, but if you get it right and you gather the evidence and you secure and preserve that evidence, it can have a positive impact on the rest of the investigation. The golden hour in this particular investigation was kind of twofold. One was about securing the workshop to make sure that we could get access to it and that nobody else used it, and it could be forensically examined over a period of days, which it was. Also, from a financial point of view, it wasn't going to be a kind of random attack. That is something that I almost eliminated from a very early stage, simply because of where it is. So was it a customer that had been in before? And then you start to think about the reasons why. Is it financial? Is it a robbery or a burglary that's gone wrong? Did David owe somebody some money and they were trying to recover the money? So we drafted in a financial investigator working with the police, and he was starting to look at the actual basics of the business, how it was doing financially, what was going on.
Could David have been targeted for money? Was it a revenge attack for a business deal gone wrong? Or something closer to home?
So Julie did actually send me a few messages, and she called me quite distressed, probably a couple of weeks before David was killed. She did say that her telephone had been cut off, but then was restored again. She said that her electricity had been cut off, but restored again. She felt that someone was messing around with them.
Aware that this information could be key to the investigation, Lisa contacts the police.
So we had what are known as a PULSA team, police search advisor team, specialist search officers that did a kind of fingertip search in the parameters around the building. And actually they found something which appeared quite significant. Deposited in some bushes on a neighbouring piece of land next to the joinery workshop, they found some keys, and we were able to establish at a slightly later point that one of those keys fitted the storeroom that David had been locked inside. So this is quite a significant find for us. Obviously those items were forensically examined, they didn't yield any evidence, but the finding of those keys supported at that point the account that Julie Dixon had given, because they were found in the direction that the two offenders were alleged to have gone off in.
Further inquiries begin to yield some surprising discoveries.
I think the first kind of breakthrough in terms of new information for the investigation wasn't, surprisingly, to do with the two offenders. It was to do with the financial affairs, if you like. We'd been led to believe by the inquiries that we conducted that the business was in a good place financially, that David was doing well, and that the accounts were healthy. In actual fact, when we had a financial investigator start to look more closely at the accounts and the business, the opposite was true. They were in dire financial straits, on the verge, if not already, bankrupt, and there was some serious financial issues.
Having been unaware of the financial issues at David's business, further inquiries throw up more concerns.
The post that was going to the business was supposed to be going to David Twigg Joinery, had been redirected to this garage. And that was quite a big point for us as well, because then that begs the question, well, why is the post being redirected? Who's redirecting it? And what lies behind that?
In Lincolnshire, the investigation into the murder of David Twigg has thrown up some suspicious activity around his business.
It soon became clear that both the workshop and the bungalow where they lived had been remortgaged.
Finances were becoming a little bit more of a priority line of inquiry, and we needed also to know why the post was being redirected to another address. We were still keeping an open mind. Obviously, we were still trying to establish these two master offenders, who they were, where they were, why they'd done what they did. But also these other things were starting to kind of build up in terms of the finances, first and foremost, very, very different to how we'd initially thought they were.
While the investigation homes in on David's financial affairs and whether his death could be linked to a business deal, 2 months after his murder, David's body is released so he can finally be laid to rest. Friend Lisa accompanies David's partner Julie to the funeral.
That was a huge, big turning point for us. Suddenly my gut feeling started to take over. The funeral, she acted very strange for someone that was basically saying the last goodbye to a partner. She would crack jokes, and quite inappropriate jokes, acting slightly inappropriately towards people. She was laughing very, very loud. Then suddenly she'd be upset. It just seemed really irrational. And I felt uncomfortable.
But it isn't just friends who have their concerns. Having uncovered some financial irregularities surrounding David and Julie's business, Lincolnshire police have more questions.
Yeah, we were looking for answers to these questions, and the only person that really could probably provide them was Julie Dixon. I was conscious that we were asking her a lot of questions and being quite direct with her, when actually, on the face of it, she was a victim of the most awful circumstances. But we had to ask those questions. We weren't always given the answers that we were looking for.
As well as the finances, police inquiries with David's creditors flag up something else.
All the inquiries that we carried out with the businesses and the authorities that were dealing with this financial debt, nobody had ever spoken personally or otherwise, with David Twigg. Every kind of communication, be it on the telephone, email, that sort of thing, was with Julie Dixon. And what we also uncovered, which was really quite concerning, was that people were being told by Julie that David was terminally ill, that he was abroad on holiday, that he was really unable to take any calls for various different reasons. And this concerned us because we couldn't corroborate this in any way.
Having also discovered the post addressed to David's business was being redirected to a local garage, Stuart and his team trawl through the garage's CCTV, hoping it will reveal who is behind the redirection. Instead, they find another clue.
And when we examined that CCTV, we found that Julie had driven there in a vehicle on the morning of the murder and had filled up petrol cans with petrol at the location. And when we did challenge her with finding that information in the CCTV footage, she told us, yes, I did go to the garage that morning. We were doing some gardening and I needed to get some petrol to fill the lawnmower up. We established also that Julie had a BlackBerry type mobile phone. And as part of a murder investigation, you're always looking at mobile phone data because it can tell you a lot of things, and we couldn't get into it. So clearly we asked Julie on more than one occasion, could you please help us and tell us what the PIN number is so we can access this device? She was unable to do so. She said that she'd forgotten, she couldn't remember it. Clearly she had been using it very recently and on the day of the murder. We had evidence of that. If nobody else uses it and nobody else has changed the PIN or password, then she must know that number or that code. What's in that BlackBerry? Why won't she tell us the PIN number? We really desperately needed to get to the bottom of what had happened, and this was the point where the investigation focus really changed.
As the months tick by, friends of Julie also start to have their doubts as to what really occurred that fateful night.
One race meeting that I remember very, very clearly was the last race meeting that she's ever come to. When we arrived there was a police car there. She started screaming and hitting things, shouting at the top of her voice, making some very loud noises. And I just said, Julie, talk to me. What's wrong? Why are you upset? She sat, she rocked, she cried, she rocked, she cried. And then she started saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And I just said, what are you sorry for? Tell me what you're sorry for. She rocked, she cried, I'm sorry. And it was like a repeated process. She said nothing else, she did nothing else.
While Julie spends a weekend away with friends, back at the investigation, forensic evidence starts to build up.
Now, the account Julie gave was that the two men had come in, there'd been a tussle, she'd managed to get out of the place, and she'd gone to ring 999, and then she'd noticed them running out, the two offenders, and they ran off round the back, and she went back in to try and rescue David or find him, and as she opened the door, there was a flashback, and she was hit with the fumes from the fire and the explosion. And that was how she got the injuries. Actually, forensic evidence would say otherwise and would indicate that it was what's known as a vapour cloud.
When the petrol would be originally poured into the foyer and lit, as the petrol's ignited, the vapour cloud would ignite first. And anybody in that vicinity would get caught in that vapour cloud. And depending on the amount of vapour and the intensity of it, they may just get slight singeing and flash burns, or they could indeed get quite badly burnt. That seemed to be fitting more with the burns to Julie Dixon than rather what she was telling us, that she would open the door and it flared up. In fact, we considered it quite unlikely that she had opened the door and the petrol had flared up like that. Once it's lit, it's done that initial flare up, and it's unlikely that would happen again. There was a petrol can behind the door. Had she have opened the door right at the start of the fire, she would have moved the petrol can, so that evidence didn't add up.
We also recovered from a forensic examination of the bungalow some very small hairs in the bathroom sink. Now, again, on the surface, first viewing, not particularly relevant, but when we have those sent off to be forensically examined, and we find out that they belong to Julie Dixon, those hairs. Again, not particularly relevant. It's her bathroom. She uses a bathroom. There are going to be hairs. They were identified as eyelash or eyebrow hairs, but they were singed. They were burned. That put a kind of different slant on it as well.
Finding burned eyebrow hairs revealed Julie had gone into the bathroom after the fire had started, knowing full well her partner was trapped inside a burning building, something which raises suspicion among the police. Not only that, but the fire investigators believe Julie could only have received her injuries if she'd been inside the building when the fire started.
Julie Dixon had given various different accounts. She'd given us very little information. The more we tried to put to her by way of questions, the more withdrawn she'd become at that point, and actually became quite defensive at various times as well. And it was at that point that I made the decision, based on all the anomalies and the significant findings, she was going to be arrested on suspicion of the murder of her partner, David.
Three months after David's death, and news of Julie's arrest soon spreads around her hometown.
Obviously, there had been a lot of anxiety and fright in the community about intruders being at large. So in some ways, the arrest of Julie put that to bed. But equally, there was also some anger that obviously they'd spent 3 months believing Julie's story.
There was a lot of upset people. She had upset a lot of people because she befriended, well, she was everybody's friend. She was a very likeable person. And yeah, it was a big shock to everybody.
Julie Dixon is brought into the police station for formal questioning, this time as a suspect, not as a witness.
I was prepared, I thought, for most things to come from that interview, including a no-comment interview, which is quite common. So we'd gathered together as a group, the interviewing officers, the SIO, the interview coordinator, to discuss what could happen. But what actually did happen, I think it's fair to say, threw us all at that point. She provided a prepared statement, and what it said in a nutshell was that this whole situation had been a suicide pact. So what she said was that both her and David had wanted to die due to the dire financial circumstances around the business and personal issues, and that they were preparing to do just that, but that when the crunch came to lighting the petrol and setting the fire, she panicked and ran out of the building, leaving David behind.
In Lincolnshire, police are questioning David Twigg's partner on suspicion of his murder.
My initial thoughts were that if Julie was prepared to lie about two masked raiders and invent a story around what had actually happened, then what else had she lied about?
In interview, Julie claims the fire was a joint suicide pact, but that she had panicked and fled. So police need to establish if there is any truth in her account.
Let's go back and speak to friends and family. What sort of state of mind was David in? And actually, fairly quickly, it was established that he was in a good state of mind. He had no idea, we think, that the business was in such dire straits. He had no reason to die.
There's no way that David, in his right mind, would do a suicide pact, because he loved life too much and he was enjoying it too much. You know, the weeks before he got killed, he was down with us, enjoying it, planning the next year, the next trips, where we were going. He would never had that in his back of his mind. So we knew for ourselves then that she was bonkers and she had done it, and she was now trying to get herself out of a murder.
Suddenly, here we are. It's now a suicide pact. And who has a suicide pact but's locked behind a door that they don't have the key to, so they couldn't even change their mind if they wanted to? Poor David died on his hands and knees in a praying position, leaning against a door that was locked from the outside. That's not a suicide pact.
With time running out to hold Julie Dixon without charge, Senior Investigating Officer Stuart Gibbon consults with the Crown Prosecution Service.
So we clearly were very concerned about this prepared statement and just felt that it was probably another way of shifting focus. You know, we've had the masked offenders, they no longer exist now, so now we're going to go down the suicide pact, which is, interestingly enough, is a partial defence to murder, and if found to be true, could result in a conviction for manslaughter rather than murder. So that kind of made sense at that point. We had CPS working with us, so we could talk to them about the content of that prepared statement. They were already fully au fait with the evidence that we gathered that far. And the CPS lawyer was happy at that point that there was sufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect for conviction. So the decision was made to charge Julie Dixon with murdering her partner, David Twigg.
With Dixon charged with murder, police and CPS prepare for trial, and part of that means trying to establish a motive. Why would Julie want David dead?
The main strands of evidence, really, I mean, there were quite a few bits of circumstantial as well, the petrol and the redirection of the post, but the main ones were really the finances. You know, we found out that they were in dire straits. What I think is that it was getting to the point where a warrant was issued for non-payment of fines. The bailiffs were going to turn up at the workshop at some point. That is the stage where David would become aware of the scale of this debt, in fact the debt existed at all maybe, and Julie Dixon could then hold that back no longer. That was where it was all going to come to a head.
As well as discovering the couple were in serious financial trouble, police now had CCTV proving Julie purchased petrol on the day of the murder. But it's forensic evidence of a computer found in the couple's workshop, which really helps build the case for the prosecution.
We'd heard stories that she'd been Googling stuff on a laptop, claiming that David had been Googling stuff. How do you commit suicide with it being undetected?
She was Googling on her laptop how to poison someone with cakes and how to get away with murder.
As the trial approaches, Julie Dixon changes her story yet again.
Things kind of changed a little bit again when Julie Dixon then started to say that it wasn't a suicide pact. Actually, David did want to die, and she was just trying to help him along, basically. So she's trying to remove herself even further from any kind of blame whatsoever. You know, it was David's idea. David wanted to do it. I just kind of helped him. Things had changed hugely since the first 999 call to the emergency services, but we felt we had a strong case. On the second day of that hearing, the not guilty plea, which had been entered initially by Julie Dixon, changed to a guilty plea, but she still maintained at that point that this had been all about David wanting to die. That's what the defence was putting forward, whereas our defence was cold-blooded, premeditated, pre-planned murder.
With Julie's shocking confession, the trial is halted.
Once Julie Dixon had admitted her guilt and pleaded guilty to David's murder, the role of the jury was no longer needed, but then falls to the judge to decide on what basis he believes her plea and on what basis the killing was carried out. So this is what is called a Newton hearing, and the judge hears evidence from all the parties in the case, and it's in the judge's role to decide how the murder was carried out effectively.
The prosecution lays out its case to the judge, and Julie's 999 call is played to the court.
They attacked us and set fire to the place.
So the place that actually set fire?
Yeah.
Is it the building that's on fire?
It is, yeah.
It is, okay then.
I got out. I managed to get them.
Right then. It's okay. Is everybody out of the building?
No, there's still my partner in.
The phone call, on the face of it, sounded very genuine. She sounded distraught. She was hysterical. But actually, the first information imparted was more of an account about what they'd been doing, like a rehearsal, rather than just saying, I need help and I need help quickly.
Over 5 days, the court hears how Julie's account changed throughout the investigation. From masked intruders to a joint suicide pact, to her assisting David in his own bid to take his own life.
The defence argued, once Julie Dixon had pleaded guilty, that matters had spiralled out of control, and that in some ways this had been an emotional response from Julie Dixon, almost that she had panicked because of the financial difficulties she got into. However, I think from the prosecution's point of view, and certainly from the police point of view, this was a perpetrator who had changed her accounts whenever it had suited her, whenever she had been confronted with new evidence. There was always a line of defence. So it's hard not to see her really as a very skillful and manipulative liar.
Julie Dixon didn't take the stand at all, didn't give evidence, was again very impassive, didn't present any emotion at any stage of the court proceedings, merely sat in the dock and appeared to be listening to the proceedings.
The extent of the couple's financial difficulties is revealed to the judge.
David wouldn't have had a clue about that bankruptcy. He was quite happy going about his everyday business. I think if he had found out that he had been declared bankrupt, he would have been incredibly upset, being such a proud man. So, yeah, she obviously kept that from him. And I can't see that those finances would have been enough for anyone to lose their life over.
At the end of that hearing, Judge Heath had to decide whose account he believed. And he came firmly down on David Twigg's side and said that he in no way believed that David Twigg had wanted to commit suicide. And he described Julie Dixon's account as a pack of lies.
The judge was quite damning in his comments and quite clear that he thought it was a cold-blooded murder and that, you know, she'd been kind of playing the part, and it was potentially worthy of an Oscar nomination if it hadn't been so sad and so true.
Julie Dixon is sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years for the murder of David Twigg. 11 years on, he is still remembered fondly.
No sentence can ever bring back a loved one. It will never be enough, of course, and it will never bring David back. But I just hope it brings some little comfort to the loved ones and those who loved David so much.
It just beggars belief that anyone would do that to another human being, a living person, someone you're supposed to care about, your partner. It's just incredibly difficult to understand how anyone would do that.
I think the hardest thing is to wrap your head around is the way she calculated it, how she planned it all. What else was she planning? What else was she thinking? They say it's down to money. We'll never know. Obviously, she don't care about anybody because obviously she did what she did. So no one will ever know what's going through her head.
This investigation and this case impacted hugely on the community and the village of Burla Marsh. You know, people aren't going to forget what happened. It lives with them forever, and whenever the name of the village is sometimes mentioned, people will talk about this case. I know I certainly will never forget it.
When a routine call to a house fire turns into the biggest murder investigation in Welsh history, you know you're in for a chilling ride. New Murder in the Valleys starts Wednesday at 9.
This episode contains descriptions of violence, sexual assault, grief, and depression.
Julie was the one person who would never, ever forget anything and brought the family together to stay close-knit.
That's Cheryl Simmons, a medical professional from Michigan. She's telling me about Julie, her daughter and best friend.
To say we were close is an understatement. She was attached at the hip.
Julie was a people person. She was always gathering friends, planning family get-togethers, hosting Christmases or Thanksgivings. She saw the good in everyone, says Cheryl.
And she always wanted to fix them. and for me to try to explain to her that you can't fix everybody. It's not possible. She would never see it that way. Never. She felt that even the most broken person could be fixed. And I hate so much that I didn't give her that part of the intuition to see into people's faces or souls that not everybody was fixable. So when she got with this guy, they were together 3 months, knew each other 4. I got scared. In my heart, I was deathly afraid for her because I seen something in him that scared me.
Cheryl's motherly intuition turned out to be tragically correct. In July 2016, Julie's then boyfriend, the one Cheryl says scared her, ran Julie over and left her for dead.
And as a mom, I don't care what anybody says, you look at your child and I knew she was gone. But I still wanted that hope. I wanted it more than anything.
Julie died a week later after being taken off life support. She was 27 years old. Her killer pleaded guilty of a moving violation causing death, which, in the state of Michigan, is only a misdemeanor charge. When Cheryl Simmons first connected with Katia Faber, Alex's mother, she recognized much of herself in her.
It was very much an unspoken connection.
Like Katia, Cheryl knew what it was to lose a child in the most traumatic way possible.
I was still not grasping that my daughter was not coming over to my house or calling me. It wasn't hitting me. So there was a lot of severe pain, but I went 5 days with no sleep. I lost 32 pounds. I was down to about 85 pounds at once. I'm 5'7". I can honestly say that there's parts of that first year that I don't remember at all. Not at all.
And like Katia, Cheryl wasn't prepared to watch her child's killer get away with a sentence she didn't believe reflected the severity of the crime.
All I wanted to do was to defend her. And I think that's what we do as parents. We defend our children. We protect them. We keep them safe. That's part of what we do when they're being raised, as they're growing up, when they're born.
Katia had started writing about traumatic grief publicly by the time the two mothers connected through an online grief platform. And Katia kept using a term to describe the impact of losing a child that resonated with Cheryl: parental annihilation.
It's almost as if you're annihilated. I mean, a part of you just leaves the body, I think. I mean, certainly I now live life on a different level.
The trauma Katia and Cheryl have both been through changed everything for them. So much so that Katia still finds it difficult to think of the time before that trauma.
It's hard to go back to 2014. I have to say, I don't really think about it the time before Alex was killed. I would say I was living the life of an average middle-aged woman in the West. You know, if you'd seen me in the supermarket, you wouldn't have said, oh my goodness, look at that person. I would have been doing the shopping for dinner.
Katia might have come from a world of privilege in many ways, but she's down to earth and considers herself a pretty ordinary mother of 3. That is, up until the point her son Alex was killed. She went to work, she did the housework, spent time with friends, and busied herself with her kids. The Katia I've got to know over the last 12 months is strong, fearless, and determined in her fight for justice for Alex. But up until this point in our story anyway, she has essentially played the role of a grieving parent, or co-victim, as she described herself during the trial.
I can't speak for other co-victims, but certainly my experience is that we're almost treated like collateral damage, that we're almost an impediment to the very serious business of implementing the law.
But all that was about to change when Bennett's lawyers announced their decision to appeal. after he was convicted of both intentional homicide and a sexual assault. Because, like Cheryl, whose daughter's killer was freed after just 6 months in jail, Katia made a decision as she watched Bennett's lawyers go into battle. And like Cheryl, she was about to undergo a transformation.
Katia just went into legal mode, and she said to me on more than one occasion, if I don't do something about this, this guy's going to walk free.
A defender. That's what Katia was to become.
When something is wrong and you know that it's wrong, it gives you a strength that perhaps you didn't know you had.
Katia calls it her rebellion, the transition from mother to defender that she underwent in those next few months after the appeal was announced. She wasn't going to let Bennett get away with the killing of her son.
It's a little bit like perhaps if you're practicing for a play, an amateur play in a small village hall, and no one's there, and then suddenly you're on Broadway or the West End and the curtain goes up and suddenly the place is full, and you go, oops, I hadn't quite expected this.
I'm Katie Strick, and this is Injustice, Killer Privilege, from the London Standard and Message Heard. Episode 4, The Rebellion. In 2019, 2 years after the initial trial, the appeal began. Katia could barely get into the lobby area of Zurich's High Court, its appeal court, when she arrived. It was heaving with people, and there was a strange atmosphere in the air. The case was being taught in universities by this point. A case study for diminished responsibility, apparently. So there were law students everywhere, notebooks at the ready, eager to watch one of the biggest recent cases in Swiss law play out for themselves.
And at the time, it actually hurt me somehow to think that Alex was just part of case law. And he would have thought that that was incredibly crazy.
Katia Faber was about to find out whether her son's killer, the man who was sentenced to 12.5 years in jail 2 years ago, was to be successful in his appeal. Bennett's legal team consisted of 3 private lawyers, paid for by his family. One to fight the intentional killing sentence, a second to fight the rape sentence, and a third to geo-block any news stories about it, and to prevent Bennett's name from being published in connection with the crimes. The latter was that same media lawyer, Andreas Miley, who announced the appeal outside the court at the end of episode 3. It's far from commonplace for a defendant to have their own media lawyer during a homicide trial. But this, as we already know, was far from an ordinary homicide trial. Together, Miley and his colleagues claimed Bennett was so high on cocaine, ketamine, and sleeping pills on the night that Alex died that he went temporarily insane and believed Alex was an alien with, quote, green ears and red eyes trying to kill him. They claimed he had not been aware of what he was doing because he was under the influence of drugs. And 9 days after they put their case before judges, they received a decision.
Yeah, it was really special when this case was in front of the higher court. It changed totally. That happens rarely in Switzerland.
Here's Swiss court reporter Christine Brand, who followed the case closely.
The appealing court, the higher court, sometimes changed the verdict a little bit and says, nah, not 12 years, maybe 10 years, or maybe 15 years. But they changed the verdict completely. They followed the arguments of the lawyers of Bennett, and they said, no, Bennett was incompetent because of the drugs, and he did not know what he did, and so he just got 3 years of prison. And also the rape, the judge did not believe the ex-girlfriend of Bennett, and so they said they don't have enough proof that this rape really happened. So it was like, we have a word in German, it's like Persilschein, it's like everything is cleaned again.
Bennett was acquitted of both aggravated rape and aggravated sexual assault after his appeal. He was still found guilty of killing Alex. But because he was assumed to be completely insane due to the drugs that night, his charge was changed to one that carries just a 3-year sentence, time he had already served. Just like that, it was announced that Bennett could be released from jail. He was technically a free man.
And I remember thinking, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I need to get out of here.
Katia was devastated, lost for words. For her, it was not only an insult to the injury of Alex's death, but a reminder of something Cheryl had said after her daughter's killer got off with a very lenient plea deal.
It was as if I was being re-victimized. I cried, I screamed. You just killed my daughter again for a second time, and now I have to suffer.
Alex's killer is just going to be back on the street again, and, with a bit of rehab. And how is this possible? We fought for so long. And how can it be that he's now just not guilty?
Katia wasn't the only one left asking these questions. As a court reporter, Christine was familiar with the Swiss legal process, but even she was astonished.
For me, it was difficult to believe, and it was surprising. I never guessed that could happen, and I'm still wondering why it did happen.
So too were Katia's friends, Helen and Kim.
Oh, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. That was just bullshit.
It was torture. It's a cruel and unusual punishment to the victim's family. It really is. And so, yes, I would say over time, this continued challenge and continued fight affected mental health of, frankly, all of us that were close to Katja or to Alex.
You're probably asking yourself the same questions I did when I first heard this story. How could this be allowed to happen? How did Bennett manage to downgrade his sentence to just 3 years? The answer, it transpired, lay in a funny little legal loophole that Bennett's team were able to take advantage of. It's called Article 263.
So first of all, it's possible that under the influence of drugs or alcohol, that this reduces your ability to really recognize what you are doing. So this is the reason why sometimes, and I say really sometimes, it's possible that this reduces your responsibility in the legal system.
Frank Urban-Jock is a Swiss-German psychology professor. He's considered a leading international expert in forensic psychiatry, with a focus on violent and sexual offences. I spoke to him in a bid to understand this particular legal loophole and the role it played in this extraordinary case. His explanation was as shocking as it was simple. In essence, under Article 263, anyone who is proven to be of, quote, unsound mind as a result of self-induced drunkenness or intoxication can face a reduced sentence, either a fine or a prison sentence of up to 3 years. Yes, you did hear that correctly. It essentially means you can get away with just 3 years for murder.
It's common, for example, in traffic crimes where somebody maybe drives a car under the influence of drugs or alcohol and maybe he produces an accident. Then you say, okay, the question of what is his responsibility is not in the moment when he drives the car with a lot of alcohol. It's in the moment when he started drinking and drove the car. The problem is when you started drinking. This is the idea of 263.
This question of when an offender started drinking or taking drugs, and whether they were aware of the potential consequences, is at the crux of Bennett's case.
The question is, when this guy started drug consumption, couldn't he know that he could react in that violent way?
Because this trial was not about who killed Alex. Bennett wasn't denying that part. It was about whether or not he knew what he was doing. Professor Urban-Jock believes Bennett's history of violence was key here.
You have this history of violence, then you have these sex offenses against the ex-girlfriend, and you have to bring all of that together and not narrow your mind too early to it's only ketamine. You always have to separate. Is there a personal history? Are there personal traits that are linked to a tendency committing violent crimes? And is the consumption of drugs and alcohol important for that?
Bennett had a proven record of violence, as we know. We also know he'd been warned by doctors not to take ketamine again. And yet, in Bennett's appeal, this personal history was all but dismissed. Bennett was deemed out of his mind on drugs, unaware of his actions, and exempt from any true culpability. If you're going to stab someone, make sure you down a bottle of wine first, was the message Katia and many of her supporters saw this verdict as sending. Bennett was convicted of Article 263 in 2019 and released from jail to attend an enclosed rehab. The kind that has cloisters and garden therapies and a glossy brochure, in case you were picturing some kind of soulless, sanitised hospital. And Katia? Well, this is where her rebellion began.
I was shaking. I remember I was shaking of just, I don't know, shock probably. And at that point I thought, no, I can't just accept this. And I turned to my lawyer and I said, I want to lose my privacy. My anonymity is worth nothing. I have to fight this.
We'll be right back. Katia made a decision that would go on to define the next 6 years of her life. She dropped that cloak of anonymity that had been shielding her from public attention in the years since her son's killing. She decided to speak out and took her story to the press.
I and some friends went back to the house of a very close girlfriend of mine. And we sat there and we had the criminal code open in front of us. It was almost like a sort of a meeting of how are we going to organize this rebellion? What does it take? And as that evening wore on, somehow the idea kind of solidified in me. I have to fight this, and not only fight this for Alex. I have to fight this for anyone else who's ever going to be in this situation. This is just wrong. And so I didn't have any tools to use except somehow create awareness, to talk to the media and talk to politicians and go to the parliament and create enough of a momentum that people would say, hey, this is just wrong. This Article 263 needs to be revised or removed from the law books because it can be misused.
I have a picture of Katia, taken in December of that year, 2019. A month after Bennett's release was announced. She's standing in the Swiss Parliament with the politician Alfred here, campaigning to have Bennett's conviction reinstated. And there's a steeliness on her face that speaks to that transition from mother to defender. She's standing upright, frowning slightly, looking straight ahead with a kind of fierceness about her. To me, it says, I'm not going to take no for an answer, and I'm prepared to fight for as long as it takes. But to Katia, that picture tells a different story.
It's funny, actually. I know the photograph, and I look really serious in that photograph. I think there was a resolve, there was a grit, a mixture of, I have to do something. This is just not right. In my gut, it felt that it wasn't right. But I did feel terribly small. You know, I was going to Parliament all by myself. It would have been nice to have had somebody with me, but I didn't. And I'm a nobody, you know, I'm just like the mum on the way to Parliament.
Switzerland has a direct democracy, meaning citizens can bring issues to Parliament if they drum up enough support. So if Katia gained enough signatures, she could theoretically launch a referendum to do away with Article 263 altogether. Katia was keen to explore this, hence her decision to attend Parliament. But before embarking on another all-consuming legal battle, she was determined to see her fight with Bennett through to the end. This time, it was Katia who appealed. Or rather, she insisted the prosecutor appeal on her behalf.
The second time we turned up at the appeal court was very different. It was the beginning of the summer. It felt different.
Katia herself was certainly different this time round. Her friend Kim, another mother from that international school crowd in Zurich, observed a shift in Katia almost immediately.
That was the part where you saw the person go from somebody you didn't recognize, this just internal imploded person, back to the person that you recognize. And I always believe that a person's true character comes out during times of stress and duress. And Katya's character is strength and determination. And that's what came out, times 10.
Come out it did. And battle, I think, is the right word here. It's important to remember, this is a woman who'd already had a nervous breakdown and half her hair fall out due to the trauma of learning the details of her son's death. But Katia had other ideas. She was overcome with what she can only describe as an instinct to protect Alex in death just as fiercely as she tried to when he was alive. Wary that she was up against the von Werther's legal army, she sold her Swiss apartment and used the funds to pay the mounting legal fees. The prosecutor hadn't wanted to appeal initially and had only agreed on the grounds that Katia and her lawyers did all the work. It was the COVID pandemic by this point too, which added another hurdle to Katia's fight. Here's journalist Christine Brand again.
For me, it was clear it's not over. When one court says it's like this and the other court says, no, it's the opposite way, then it's clear that the highest court has to decide. And it was clear that Katia will fight.
Katia estimates she spent hundreds of thousands of pounds to fund the mammoth legal marathon she had just embarked on. But for her, it was the emotional costs she felt more acutely than the financial ones during those dark months in 2021.
Some people have said to me, would I have undertaken this fight had I known that this was what I was going to have to do? And the answer is always yes. I mean, I would have just handed over the keys and said, hey, take the apartment and let me know how it goes. The bit that nobody could have warned me about, and I didn't realize that, is that I would not only have to pay huge amounts of money, but that I would have to fight as well. So actually it was quite expensive. It was expensive on an emotional front, psychological front, and financial front. And money is money. But on the emotional, psychological front, that's a heavy price to pay.
The grief fog of losing Alex, as Katia calls it, had left her feeling so disarmed, so incapable, that she'd been unable to work for years up until this point. So reading through pages and pages of court documents in another language, even with her legal background, made her brain ache.
I couldn't really concentrate very much. I would read a page and I would forget it.
And yet, Katia doesn't know which one would have been worse. Sitting at the sidelines as a grieving mother without any input into the legal process, or going through what she did and being actively involved in the prosecution. She suspects the former.
Why would I deal with it any differently? He was still my son, and it was one of the ways that I could be his mother.
I want to pause here for a moment, because there's something Katia said to me during our conversations about her legal fight that struck me in particular, about the role of a mother.
When I look at history and the news, I'm always struck by the fact that it seems to be mothers who are fighting for their children.
It's a question I'd not really stopped to consider before, but Katia is right. When I think back through so many of the stories of grieving families I've encountered over my journalistic career, Rosamund Kissy Deborah, mother of London schoolgirl Ella, who died of air pollution, June Steenkamp, mother of Oscar Pistorius' victim Riva, the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, whose children were kidnapped in Argentina. The imbalance is striking. Why is it so often the mother, not the father, the sibling, or the grandparent, who's left fighting for their dead or missing child?
And it's challenging. I mean, most of us don't have a background of, public speaking, and that's not what we set out to do with our lives. And yet, many find the courage and their voice because their child has died.
Cheryl, who's still outraged by the many injustices of her daughter's trial, agrees it's interesting, that trope of the mother who so often ends up fighting for the victim in a lawyer's absence.
I don't know. I think as mothers, we're automatically defenders. I mean, anybody who has kids know that if something's going on, their kid's being bullied at school, you are a defender. You're going to defend your child.
She believes it's to do with that unbreakable motherly bond that's so often talked about.
If you think about it, we carry those babies inside of us for 9 months. My daughter heard my heart before anybody even knew it.
Let's zoom back in now and rejoin Katia in June 2021. It had been almost 2 more years since the appeal court's shock decision to free Bennett. But in 2021, the case was brought before the Swiss Supreme Court. And this time, if you can believe it, something more shocking happened.
The federal court said that the verdict of the highest court is wrong. They really said it's not correct how you were handling the situation with the rape. It was like the federal court did not understand how the higher court could come to this verdict. And it was like a bashing.
In a decisive move, the Supreme Court struck down the appeal court decision and ordered a rehearing of that initial appeal. Basically, the Supreme Court was arguing that the judges in the appeal did a subpar job, and they needed to evaluate the arguments of Bennett's team a second time. So, in May 2022, the final appeal hearing took place in Zurich's appellate court.
And so the end verdict was then nearly the same like the first one, and also they believed the ex-girlfriend, so he was convicted also for the rape. It was nearly the same verdict like the first one. It was just a unnecessary extra round. And for the relatives, for Katia, for the people who knew Alex, that's super hard because you wait for years. It lasted years until this final verdict was here.
Bennett was found guilty of intentional homicide once more, effectively throwing out the 2019 decision and reinstating his original sentence of 12 years. After an unnecessary 2.5 years of stress and legal fees for Katia, she had won. Bennett was guilty again. He was a convicted killer, a fact that would never change.
It was a huge sense of relief of having done right by Alex, that somehow it had been worth all the effort and stress and money and time. And, we left the court and we were all so elated. We walked down into the old town of Zurich, down a little alleyway. And we went into a sort of cafe place and we ordered a Küppli, which is basically a glass of champagne or Prosecco. And we were just so elated and so happy.
But this story doesn't stop in that champagne bar in central Zurich, relieved as Katia was in that moment. For many people less strong-willed than Katia, that might have been the end. She had won, the case was closed. But Katia's search for justice didn't stop at Bennett's final sentencing.
If Bennett had learned something, if Bennett had changed in some way, if he'd been able to say, I want to change my life, Alex is dead and this is awful, then somehow it would give Alex's death meaning in some kind of weird way, that one young man died so another could find his way. Almost kind of like a Greek play in some ways.
Bennett had not found his way or shown any kind of remorse for his actions. Not in Katia's eyes.
There was a conviction and I'd done what I set out to do. And I'd been through so many different emotions and this process. And I'd met lost parents and I'd done all this all this stuff. And yet Alex was still dead. And somehow I had all this energy that I channeled into fighting for him and doing right by him was now somehow not needed anymore. And he was still dead. And it felt awful.
Katia found herself falling into a deep hole. She struggled to rejoice every time a reporter approached her for a quote on achieving justice, or whether she could finally offer Bennett forgiveness. She could have forgiven Bennett for the killing, if he'd apologised afterwards and made an effort to turn his life around. Instead, hers felt like a hollow victory. The outcome she'd ended up with, Bennett behind bars, minus any seeming pangs of conscience, felt like the least satisfying of all the possible outcomes in terms of forgiveness, and made it impossible to move on. She found herself thinking about a letter she'd received, way back in 2019, shortly before the first appeal.
I received a letter, handwritten letter, from Alex's killer. And I remember not wanting to touch the paper. I felt somehow disgusted by it, which I thought was odd. And I observed myself, thinking, how strange is that? It's only a piece of paper.
Katia keeps that letter in a plastic sleeve inside a safety deposit box. 6 years on, she still can't bring herself to touch it. I have a copy of it in my hand here in front of me. The letter's written in large, childlike handwriting, printed across a sheet of squared paper. The type you're given in maths lessons at school, to paint you a picture. It reads, quote, "I have written countless letters which I have never sent out of fear that I would be unable to find the right words. I would give everything to undo what I have done."
He seemingly was apologising and saying how difficult it was for him to write the letter. And on it went, and I turned the page over, and I got to the end, and I remember sitting back and thinking, okay, maybe that's true, or maybe it isn't, but there's one word missing. And it was such a glaring omission. I kept thinking, how can he have not said this one word? And the one word was Alex. He had not mentioned Alex once in the entire letter. And I thought, how weird is that? You're apologising for killing Alex, and yet you fail to mention Alex. It was all about him.
All about Bennett. It would turn out to be a fitting summary for Bennett's actions over the following years. Because the British papers had got one thing wrong in their reporting of the outcome of Katia's appeal. While Bennett did see out the final months of his original 9-year sentence as he was supposed to, he did not serve them from jail. Instead, he stayed where he was, at that luxurious, leafy rehab centre from which he'd been allowed to attend art history lectures. Around a year later, he was moved to a halfway house in Canton, Zurich, to see out the remaining months of his sentence. So, in total, only 4 years of his sentence were actually served behind bars, in the traditional sense. After receiving treatment for addiction from rehab, Bennett was released on full parole on December the 30th, 2023, the anniversary of Alex's death. In episode 5, Alex's friend Sam tells us about the death of a second friend, in chillingly similar circumstances.
I've got chills up my spine and goosebumps thinking about it every time I talk about it.
Alex's social circle discussed the psychology of wealth and the issue of substance abuse amongst privileged young men.
So partying, yeah, I reckon it started off with, I don't know, these festivals, depending on music, mostly electronic music. And then also the older we got, we went into various clubs in Zurich.
And Sasha, the reporter, delves into the mysterious death of another of Bennett's friends.
So suddenly you had two friends that were dead. And that made it, I would say, an interesting story.
Injustice, Killer Privilege is a London Standard and Message Heard production. I'm your host, Katie Strick. This episode was produced by Sophie McNulty. Harry Stott is our senior producer, and James Cox is our production coordinator. Sandra Ferrari, Anna Van Prague, and Jake Warren are the executive producers. Sound editing by Lizzie Andrews and Alan Lear, and music composition by Tom Biddle.